Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Do's and Don'ts in a Crisis PR Situation. I am David Oates, and I am the founder of publicrelationssecurity.com. We're a crisis PR services under the Stalwart Communications PR brand, and it's my pleasure to walk you through what I hope to be about a 30-minute informative session on what to do and what, importantly, not to do during a crisis PR situation. Before we get into this is really applicable to just about any organization, whether you're profit or nonprofit, whether you're small, mom and pop shop, a restaurant, maybe a street corner, or you're a global Fortune 500 company. Because really, with the advent of social media, the pervasiveness of Instagram and Snapchat, anybody can not only be a broadcaster, but B, can find themselves embroiled in a situation where the impact to your company based on a perceived negative news story can happen virtually at the click of a mouse. And so what this presentation is designed to do is to arm you with at least the basic elements of what you should and shouldn't do in any of those circumstances. And certainly, if you have any other questions, you can log on to our website here and at publicrelationssecurity.com. We've got some great blogs and information. We've also got a contact sheet, and there's a 2-minute quiz which we will have as well, that you can see where you stand in terms of a crisis, being prepared for crisis PR situation. If you get a score on that of 80% or lower, chances are you've got some things you got to work on right away. I'm going to get started here with this agenda on what, first of all, we'll define what is a crisis and how that is actually, in this day and age, probably more appropriate for discussions than necessarily talking about a particular vehicle, whether it's news organizations or not, but defining crisis in broader terms. I'm going to also talk about what it means to be in a proactive or reactive mode. We'll talk about the things you should always do, more importantly, things you should never do in a crisis PR situation, and I'll go through some quick examples. But when I think about a crisis PR position, I don't think about it in terms of how much media coverage you have, whether or not it's a Yelp review or not, or a social media post. I really think about it in terms of the impact that it has to your organization. And the definition of a crisis PR situation is, quite frankly, first and foremost, does it disrupt operations? Can you get anything done? Or are you too busy answering the mail on the perceived event? That is really drawing with you other resources that are taken away from servicing the customers, getting product out the door, attracting new customers, marketing, those kind of things that are disrupting your operations and your ability to continue in normal mode is a good definition. The other way to define a crisis PR situation is how damaging is it to your brand? How much are people now wondering whether they want to be associated with you in the first place, based on what they perceive to be something that is not aligning with their ideas of what you should be offering? And even if it's not doing that, third element of crisis PR is, are you confusing the market? Is the event in question drawing from it more of just a concern that you're no longer the company that you once were? And that's always an issue when you're looking at trying to counter a crisis PR position, is the longer you're confusing your current or potential customers, the less likely they are to convert to a repeat business or initial sale. Fourth element to think about is this crisis PR position event giving the perception that something has occurred within your organization that are conflicting with your stated values, your value proposition, your culture, your being, the things that emotionally endear yourself to customers, partners, or investors. People buy from people that they know, that they like, and that they trust. And I don't care if you're selling a widget on Amazon or you're a lawyer who deals with business transactions. You have to connect with audience members on a emotional level first. And if a crisis PR event is giving people the perception you might not be the person that they think you are or the organization that they thought you were, you're going to have a real hard time getting them back. And that's probably the best thing about the biggest definition of the crisis PR event, which is the one there, is it can be difficult to recover. I mentioned the damage potentially to any organization. There's a survey that Fleshman Hiller put out there. The impact to an organization could be $500,000. And that's just not in terms of lost revenue. That's also when you take into account lost productivity, lost profitability, brand reputation, those kind of things. That's an expensive price tag to put on that. And like I said beforehand, It's not just reserved for the Fortune 500 companies. It is, in fact, now any small mom and pop operation can be affected by a crisis PR situation. And if you think about that $500,000 price tag, that could put people out of business. So this presentation hopefully will give you the basic understanding about what to do so you can stave off that cost. I want to go into what I mean by a proactive versus a reactive response. I will tell you that any crisis PR event that meets those criteria, you're going to want to be prepared to meet and to engage. It doesn't mean necessarily that you have to every time. Something could be percolating and not necessarily warrant a full broadcast of what you're doing to counter something like that. It may be reserved to dealing with one particular organization who may not necessarily be posting anything because they want to hear your response. That's fine. It doesn't mean you don't prepare for it. But I would submit to you that there is such a stance as reactive when you are simply responding to query onlys, but you got your processes in place, you know what you want to say and how you want to say it before you go broad. Now, the reasons you go proactive on a crisis PR event is because obviously you're being inundated with a lot of stuff, media inquiries, social media posts, negative Yelp reviews. You want to go broad. That's pretty self-explanatory. But I would submit, even if it hasn't gotten that level yet, you may still want to go proactive if delaying a response to sort of get ahead of the situation is going to be less impactful than waiting until it actually does blow up, and then everybody wondering what you've been doing for the last 2 weeks. There was an incident several years ago with Experian, a credit reporting and credit monitoring company, where they had a cybersecurity data breach that they waited quite some time to publicly disclose. And the backlash of disclosing that late was as detrimental to them as the actual event itself. So this is a situation where getting feedback from a PR practitioner, getting a qualified crisis PR practitioner, getting feedback from other people involved in your organization, maybe a stakeholder, maybe a trusted partner, somebody you can talk to in confidence, and getting their feedback is going to be important. But there are options to, when you do a crisis PR plan, to be in a proactive or reactive mode. Now let's talk about the 3 must-dos in any crisis PR event. These are the essentials that you would have for any opportunity, any creative crisis event, and broadcast it by any vehicle to really anyone. And the first thing to think about is getting the 5 W's correct. In a crisis PR event, getting the facts out there as you know them in very concise, concrete terms is important. You got to tell them what's involved, where, when, and why to the extent you know it. Delaying that you have at least an understanding as to what's going on can be detrimental to an organization trying to get ahead of that. Equally as important is to get your key messages out, how you as an organization are responding to this event. And I'll go into some things that you need to work on in the next slide, but at the very least, you need to show 2 things: empathy and action. Even if it's not a crisis event that is of your own doing, maybe you're being wrongfully accused of something, or maybe somebody did something to your product that really was against your stated terms and conditions. You still need to show empathy and action for that. And I'll go into details on that. But getting your messaging and getting your statement out there is going to be important. You're going to want to also prepare for a 1-hour turnaround time if you're in a proactive mode. So an incident is blowing up there, you're going to want to respond within an hour, or at least prepare to do so. Because delaying this can cause really a lot of concern and angst to people who are looking for you for action. Now, you need to respond with clarity. You need to know how you're going to respond. You don't want to be ahead of your own strategy, but you need to move as quickly as you possibly can. And being prepared for an hour turnaround time is going to be important. You also need to identify who's going to speak to which audiences and how. Identifying your spokesperson will ensure that your message gets out clear, concise, that you're consistent across all media, and that you're also going to make sure that you control the type of inbound and outbound communication. You don't want everybody speaking to all audiences who normally don't, but For instance, having designated spokespersons like your VP of sales for your customers, your partner relations people, your CEO for investors and news media, and maybe 2 or 3 backup would be ideal. Getting that ready, getting them prepped, having them go through some pre-interview skills if they haven't done so already, media training, those kind of things is going to be essential in order to make sure you can turn this around in an hour. The last thing, and probably the most important on this slide, is to address the 5 audiences. Now, in most crisis PR situations, the default is to media. And you notice on this slide, I've got them as my last audience. Media, particularly if you look at traditional media, like television news, radio news, newspapers, they used to be, 20 years ago, the dominant intermediary between an organization and its stakeholders. Not the case anymore. As I mentioned to you, anybody can be a broadcaster if they've got an Instagram account or Snapchat account or Facebook account. You broadcast something, you talk disparagingly about an organization, and within nanoseconds, hundreds if not thousands of people are on that. And if they agree with that and they share it to other people, you've got a broadcast vehicle that mirrors that of any local 6 o'clock newscast. So I would submit to you, your audience members in any crisis situation have to be in this priority. The first one is your employees. Most people forget this audience set. And I will tell you, they're on your front lines of being able to communicate with your customers and partners, because they're the ones who are going to be in the face, virtually or figure or literally, in front of your customer base. Let's take the United Airlines instance. You recall a couple of years ago, they had a passenger that was dragged off of the airplane. I felt really bad for the ticket agents and the gate operators who had to deal with the customers in person the next day, who probably said, at least several of them would say things like, "Are you going to drag me off this plane too?" Now think about that. That employee did nothing wrong the next day, but they're the ones that need the biggest support from crisis PR people, because they need to be able to have messaging and responses and be trained in order to handle that. If they were not and left on their own devices, that made for a bad day and probably didn't not only help the customer at the end, but it made the employee really not looking forward to going to work. You also need to be able to communicate directly with your customers. There are so many ways to do that now that most organizations have at their disposal. Email addresses and social media followers, and picking up the phone. Make sure that they hear from you as directly as possibly can before they hear it from a third-party intermediary. That's probably as important as anything else to endear yourself to customers. Some companies have even mobile apps that you can push out notifications. Very essential to do that, and I would say right up there with employees. Your vendors and partners also are going to want to hear from you, and they're going to want to hear from you soon because their brand is aligned with yours, and they're also helping you deliver on your product. So the quicker you can get with them to assure them that you're on it, that you're taking action, and that you recognize the significance of the situation, more likely they're going to be willing to back you up. And the last ones are your investors in need. And as I was telling you, most organizations get in reverse because they're worried about the shareholder base and they're worried about the news organization. But I would submit to you, they're 4th and 5th on the list of priorities in any crisis PR situation. Okay, we talked about the things to do. Let's talk about the things to not do. The real big one is to wait for more information. And I would say that because this really delays people getting the message out there. Now, I'm not suggesting that you draw or speculate on where things are going. And you certainly want to, in your messaging, leave open the possibility that more information will be forthcoming once known. But you don't want to delay getting in front of your employees, your customers, your vendors, your partners, your investors, and the media that you're understanding the situation, you are on it, and you are taking action. So don't necessarily wait for more information. Give yourself the out, certainly, to be able to say that this might be just the beginning of something if necessary. But don't feel like you've got to wait until you've got all the ducks in a row. Also, don't try to create these bureaucratic approval processes for the state. Certainly a lawyer is going to want to be involved, and that's understandable. And you're going to want to get it to CEOs and stakeholders and those kind of things. But the longer you wait for a message to be disseminated, and the more people involved to getting that message, what they consider to be right, will delay the process. So there's a balance there. Again, keep to the 1 hour turnaround time in a proactive situation. get folks involved that need to, streamline the process and get it out there. Second thing I would caution organizations to do is placing blame. It might be easy to do so. You might have had situations where, again, a crisis not of your own doing or with involvement of other people, you want to talk about this in terms of broader scale. I wouldn't do that right away. That will come out in due course of time, but you've seen several times over, including a recent congressman who tried to basically blame his indictment on campaign financing on his wife. That never goes well. People look at you as not being accountable and not essentially allowing the buck to stop there. Again, if somebody has an issue, somebody's to blame, that will come out in due course. Take the hit in the beginning. It's easier and less painful. Also, don't forget that audience. I've talked about that over and over, about the importance of making sure that not just the media and the investors are the ones you're talking to, but the other key audience members. You also want to make sure you've got a process by which you're going to field these inquiries. You don't want to necessarily delay that in responding, but you want to have a process by which you're fielding inquiries, you're looking at the question, you're being able to respond with those key messages, and that comes with identifying your spokespeople, getting them trained up, recognizing what the key messages are, and getting that process streamlined as best you can. These last two are probably the ones I harp on the most: showing empathy and action. Again, your stakeholders, customers, employees, vendors, partners, investors are going to understand that you understand the severity of the situation and that you're taking steps to ensure that you can fix whatever went wrong. As important to make sure that this never happens. And then obviously failing to prepare. Having a plan in place, a crisis PR strategy that you can employ at any given time, in the same manner you do for your disaster recovery and your insurance plan, is important. Because if this thing starts to fester, it's going to be that much more difficult and that much more costly to get ahead of. Practicing these kind of events in concert with your other disaster recovery plans is the prudent course of action, again, for any organization of any size. That's a good start to talk about a couple of examples I have. Just Add a Kid is a Poway, California-based organization of about 30 employees that makes these wonderful little toddler-sized t-shirts with different characters of pirates and animals and activities like ballerina and sports, also professions like scientists, space astronauts, marine sailors, those kind of things. Just a wonderful company. They distribute through their partners these t-shirts in all over the country at airport concession stands and different novelty and gift shops and different large-scale big box stores. It's just a great company. When they do distribute these products, they have in separate boxes these hangers with kids' faces on them. They got approval for that. And the distributors and the retailers will then mix and match these hangers to different t-shirts. And they do that on their own. The company's not involved with that. And nor do they have certain instructions as to which ones they'd recommend with which products. Unfortunately, there was a retail outlet, we believe in Los Angeles, and we think that this was actually done by an employee who, either because they were ticked off or they thought it was funny, put this display together, which was an African-American boy's face on a monkey's bodice. You see this Twitter post done by somebody who may or may not have been involved with that situation, we don't know, posted that photo on their feed and said, like, explain this, and then tagged the Just Add a Kid Twitter feed. I got a call from the CEO at 3 o'clock in the middle of the week in an afternoon, 3 o'clock p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon, the middle, like I said, middle of the week and a nondescript day. Again, little 30-person company out of Poway, California. And he said, the New York Daily News just left a message. What do I do? By the next morning, it was on all the major U.S. television networks, broadcast networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox. It was on Associated Press. It was on Reuters. Actually even made it all the way to London with the UK Daily Mail on site. This little 30-person company all of a sudden is making international news for this one errant tweet. Within an hour of getting the call, we had put this statement together where we said, we found out about the photo at the same time you did. This was neither authorized, condoned, or tolerated by our company. We sincerely regretted this occurrence. We've immediately directed our retail partners to change the product placement, and we're taking steps to ensure this doesn't happen again. By the end of that night, it was on all of the social media posts. It was on their website. We had it distributed to every reporter who had written about the story, and we kept looking and searching for new stories. And when that happened, we made sure that this statement was sent to them for inclusion from that one. And we answered every inbound email. We changed the 800 number to the company by putting the voice greeting so that this message came up first. We answered every social media post and every email, which were, by the way, vicious to the company, calling the company and its founders racist and suggesting certain things happened to them that were, quite frankly, very disturbing. But we did. And in 48 hours, this story died. And the reason it died is because of our quick response and the show of empathy and action, and also showing our ability to be able to communicate in multiple channels through the right people at the right time. We didn't just focus on the media. We leveraged also the social media, emails to our vendors and partners, and all the channels that were necessary to make sure that folks had this at the ready and were ready to talk about it. And that's a real good case study on how to conduct a very explosive, proactive crisis PR event. We're even a company of really very small size in terms of revenue and in terms of employees. Another one is one of my favorite companies and one I've had the privilege of serving for a while, which is Jerome's Furniture, Southern California-based furniture retailer with about 20 locations from Los Angeles on south to San Diego. There was a product line that was affecting the market, not just this furniture retailer, but all the national chains, and it's called bonded leather, which is a leather-like substance that, if not treated well, starts to peel off of their material, off of their furniture in about 2 to 3 years. And in this case, this company, or this news station, decided they were going to do a piece on that. They went out to several different national outlets, all of whom said no comment or didn't respond at all. They kept coming at Jerome's Furniture asking for different comments, and in fact already had a customer of theirs as part of the story. And we decided we were going to go on the offense because Jerome's Furniture had a great deal of resources that every customer who bought this furniture had in terms of how to care for it, what it is, what it's not. We thought that we should be able to convey that and use this story as an example of a way to educate the consumer base as to what to do and what not to do. As you can see, the story lasted 4.5 minutes, which is about 3 minutes longer than the typical feature piece. And at the end of it, that reporter, Bob Hansen of NBC7 here in San Diego, actually thanked Jerome's for being a part of the story and showed Jerome's as a caring, concerning organization for its customers trying to do the right thing. This is a prime example also about how, by a proper response, with careful messaging and identifying a trained spokesperson that you can bring in front of the media, you can actually, in some cases, even turn a negative story into a positive story. Both these case studies are on our website. You already serve publicrelationssecurity.com. PR Security Service is the name. My name is David Oates. My contact information, including the Twitter feed and my LinkedIn profile and phone number, are on this webinar for a reason. I would love to hear from you. Feedback on this webinar. We will do more of these, offering them live to people to attend, or certainly in this case, we will have recorded afterwards and put it up as one of our blog features and also on the YouTube page. I appreciate it very much. Again, my name is David Oates with publicrelationssecurity.com. You've got the contact information. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much for your attention. I hope this was valuable. I'll look forward to seeing you the next one. Bye-bye.